December 19th, 1944. Somewhere in the frozen Netherlands, a group of British soldiers gather in a frost-covered barn. They haven't slept in a real bed for 6 months. They haven't seen their families since spring. Many of them haven't stopped fighting since they waded ashore at Sword Beach on D-Day. Now they're about to participate in a lottery, not for money, not for food, for something far more valuable. The chance to go home. This is the story of the men who fought across Europe and the cruel, hopeful moment when some of them finally got their ticket out of hell. June 6th, 1944. The world watches as the largest amphibious invasion in history unfolds across the beaches of Normandy. While American forces storm Omaha and Utah, British and Canadian troops hit Gold, Juno, and Sword. Among them, the 2nd Battalion King's Shropshire Light Infantry, part of the legendary 3rd Infantry Division. These men, farmers, factory workers, clerks, teachers, are about to step into a war that will test every limit of human endurance. Sword Beach, the easternmost landing zone of the Allied invasion. Their objective? Secure the beachhead, link up with airborne forces, and push inland before German reinforcements can crush the invasion. The water is cold. The beach is a killing ground. Machine gun fire tears through the morning air. Mortars explode in shallow water. Men fall before they reach dry sand. But they keep moving. The King's Shropshire Light Infantry, known as the KSLI, fight their way off the beach. They push through fortified German positions. They advance into the French countryside beyond. And they don't stop. For most soldiers in World War II, combat comes in bursts. You fight for days or weeks, then rotate to the rear, rest, recuperate, process what you've seen. Not for the men of the KSLI. From D-Day forward, they are always at the front. June becomes July. The Battle of Normandy grinds on. The bocage country, those dense Norman hedgerows, turns every field into a fortress. Every advance costs blood. The KSLI fights through Caen, that ancient French city reduced to rubble by Allied bombing and German defense. They push toward the Orne River. Every village is contested. Every farmhouse could hide a German machine gun nest. July becomes August. Operation Goodwood, Operation Bluecoat, the breakout from Normandy. The Germans are falling back, but they're not broken. They fight for every mile. The KSLI keeps advancing. August becomes September. Paris falls. The Allied armies sweep across France. There's talk of the war ending by Christmas. The men dare to hope. But hope is dangerous in war. The supply lines stretch too thin. The German army regroups. And suddenly, the easy advance stops. The KSLI crosses into Belgium, then the Netherlands. And there, in the flat, flooded lowlands, the war becomes something else entirely. The Netherlands in autumn and winter of 1944 is a nightmare. The Germans have flooded vast areas deliberately, turning the countryside into a frozen, muddy hellscape. Towns are fortified. Every canal is a defensive line. Every dike, every bridge, every village contested. Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's ambitious plan to end the war with a thrust into Germany, fails spectacularly in September. The British 1st Airborne Division is destroyed at Arnhem. The advance stalls. The KSLI, part of 30 Corps, fights through this disaster. They secure the corridor. They hold ground. They take casualties. And they keep fighting. October, November, December. The days grow shorter. The cold deepens. The rain turns to sleet, then snow. The men of the KSLI haven't stopped, not for 6 months. Not since that bloody morning on Sword Beach. Look at their faces in the photographs from this period. These are not the eager young men who landed in June. These are ghosts, haunted, exhausted, aged beyond their years. They've seen friends die. They've killed. They've slept in foxholes filled with freezing water. They've gone days without hot food. They've been shelled, shot at, mortared, bombed. Combat exhaustion, what we'd later call PTSD, is rampant. Men shake uncontrollably. Some can't stop crying. Others simply stare into nothing. The British Army calls it battle fatigue. The cure, supposedly, is rest. But there is no rest, not for the men at the front. Until December 19th, 1944. December 19th, 1944. Somewhere in the Netherlands, the exact location lost to history, but likely near the front lines where the KSLI is holding positions, the men of the 2nd Battalion are called together. There's an announcement. After 6 months of continuous combat, the British Army has finally arranged for leave. Not for everyone, not even for most, but for some. A lucky few will be pulled from the line, put on a truck, taken to the coast, shipped across the channel. Home. Home to England, to families, to wives and sweethearts, to mothers who've worried every day since June, to children who've grown in the months their fathers have been gone. Home to sleep in a real bed, to eat a meal not from a tin, to hear a voice that isn't shouting orders or screaming in pain. But who gets to go? The decision is made by lottery, a ballot. Names go into a hat or a helmet or a box, whatever's available. And then, one by one, the names are drawn. Imagine that moment. You're standing in a cold barn or a ruined building. Outside, the war continues. Artillery rumbles in the distance. The front line is maybe a few miles away, close enough that you could be called back into action at any moment. You've survived things that should have killed you 100 times over. You've watched friends die. You've done things you'll never be able to explain to anyone who was there. And now, someone's about to draw a name from a hat. It could be yours. Your heart is pounding. Your hands are shaking, not from cold, though it's freezing, but from the sheer desperate hope that your name will be called. Because if it is, you get to leave. You get to escape, at least for a little while. And if it's not, you stay. You go back to the line. You keep fighting. You keep surviving. Or you don't. The first name is drawn. Not yours. You watch as the lucky man, whoever he is, lets out a breath. Maybe he smiles. Maybe he cries. Maybe he just stands there, unable to process that his nightmare is about to pause. Another name. Not yours. Another. Not yours. The pile of names grows smaller. The chances shrink. The hope that burned so bright begins to flicker. And then, maybe, you hear it. Your name. Your actual name spoken aloud, cutting through the cold air of that frozen barn. You've won the lottery. You're going home. This ballot, this simple drawing of names, represents something profound about the nature of World War II and the experience of the common soldier. First, it reveals the sheer exhaustion of the British Army by late 1944. Britain has been at war since September 1939. For 5 years, the nation has mobilized everything, its economy, its industry, its young men. By 1944, manpower is running critically short. Unlike the United States, which has a massive population to draw from, Britain is a small island nation. Every casualty is felt more deeply. Every division that's been in continuous combat, like the 3rd Infantry Division, is wearing down. The men aren't just physically exhausted, they're mentally and emotionally shattered. The British Army knows this. They know that soldiers can only take so much before they break completely. Leave isn't just a reward, it's a necessity, a pressure valve, a way to keep men functional. But even in December 1944, with the war obviously winding toward an Allied victory, there's still not enough manpower to rotate everyone out. The front must be held. The Germans are still dangerous. In fact, at this very moment, they're about to launch their last great offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. So they compromise. Some men get to go home. Not all, just the lucky ones. Which brings us to the second truth this ballot reveals, the role of pure chance in survival. War is often described in terms of courage, skill, and tactics, and those things matter. But anyone who's actually been in combat will tell you luck matters more. The shell that lands 5 feet to your left instead of 5 feet to your right. The sniper who picks the man next to you instead of you. The random patrol assignment that puts you in a quiet sector instead of a hot zone. You can be the bravest, most skilled soldier in your unit, and you can still die because of random chance. This ballot is just another iteration of that same terrible truth. Your name is drawn, or it isn't. You go home, or you don't. Through no virtue or failing of your own, just luck. Some of these men, the ones whose names weren't drawn, would die in the weeks and months ahead. They'd survive 6 months of continuous combat only to be killed in January or February or March of 1945, when the war was clearly almost over. And they'd die knowing they'd been so close, that their name could have been drawn, that they could have been on a ship home instead of in a frozen foxhole. That's the cruelty of war. That's the weight these men carried. But for those whose names were drawn, for the lucky ones, December 19th, 1944 is the best day of their lives. Within days, they're on trucks heading west, away from the front, away from the killing. They reach the coast. They board ships. They cross the channel, the same water they crossed 6 months earlier, but going the other direction now. And then, England, home. The shores of Britain appear through the winter fog, the white cliffs of Dover perhaps, or the docks of Southampton. Solid ground, safe ground. And then finally, reunion. Mothers who've aged years in months, fathers trying not to cry, wives and girlfriends, children who've grown taller, who almost don't recognize the thin, haunted man who's supposed to be their father.
For a brief period, a week, maybe 2, these soldiers get to be human again. They sleep, they eat real food, they bathe, they sit by fires, they don't hear artillery, they try not to think about the fact that they have to go back. To understand the full significance of this moment, we need to zoom out and see where this ballot fits in the larger story of World War II. December 1944 is a pivotal, dangerous moment. To the casual observer back home in Britain or America, the war seems almost won. Paris is liberated, France is free, Allied armies are on German soil, Hitler's Reich is clearly collapsing. Christmas 1944 will be a time of cautious optimism. Surely the war will end soon. Surely our boys will all be home by spring. But at the front, the reality is more complicated. On December 16th, just 3 days before this ballot, Hitler launches his last desperate gamble in the West, the Ardennes Offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. German panzer divisions smash through American lines in Belgium. Allied forces are caught completely by surprise. For a moment, the entire front is in crisis. The 3rd Infantry Division, including the KSLI, is positioned in the Netherlands north of the main German attack. They're not directly involved in the Bulge, but they're on high alert. If the German offensive succeeds, it could threaten their positions too. This is the context in which that ballot takes place. Even as some lucky soldiers are drawing their tickets home, the war is exploding back into chaos. And for the men who didn't get drawn, for those who stayed, their war is far from over. The Battle of the Bulge will rage through Christmas and into January. It's the bloodiest battle American forces fight in the European theater. Over 19,000 Americans killed, tens of thousands wounded or captured. British forces, including the 3rd Division, help contain the northern shoulder of the German breakthrough. They fight in bitter cold. They hold their ground. And then, in January 1945, the Allied counteroffensive begins. The KSLI is part of it. After the briefest of pauses, they're advancing again, across the Rhine, into Germany itself. They'll fight all the way to the Baltic coast, not stopping until May 8th, 1945, VE Day, when Germany finally surrenders. Nearly a full year of continuous combat, from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany. The men of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry who went home in December 1944 brought all of that back to Britain with them. They sat at Christmas dinner tables with families who couldn't possibly understand what they'd been through. They slept in warm beds and woke up screaming from nightmares. They walked through peaceful English towns and flinched at loud noises. They looked at their children and wondered if they'd remember them when the war was over, if the war ever ended. This is the invisible wound of combat, the psychological toll that doesn't show up in casualty statistics. In 1944, they called it battle fatigue or shell shock. Today, we call it PTSD. But the suffering is the same. Studies after World War II showed that virtually every soldier who spent more than 200 days in continuous combat suffered some form of psychological trauma. Many never fully recovered.
The KSLI veterans spent nearly 180 days in continuous combat from D-Day to December. They were approaching or had exceeded that breaking point. That ballot, that leave, quite literally saved some of their minds. A week or two at home wasn't enough to heal them. Nothing could truly heal what they'd been through, but it was enough to give them a moment to breathe, to remember they were human, to glimpse a world beyond war. And then, for most, they had to go back. Back to the line, back to the fighting, back to the mud and the cold and the fear, because the war wasn't over yet. The 2nd Battalion King's Shropshire Light Infantry would continue fighting until the end of the war in Europe. On May 8, 1945, VE Day, they were in northern Germany when the surrender was announced. They had fought for 11 months continuously from Sword Beach to the Baltic. They had marched through France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. They had endured more combat than most units see in an entire war. Their casualties were staggering, hundreds killed, more hundreds wounded, some multiple times. Those who survived came home to a Britain that had also been transformed by 6 years of war. They found a nation eager to move on, to rebuild, to forget the horrors and focus on the future. Many veterans struggled to readjust. The transition from soldier to civilian is never easy, but for men who'd spent nearly a year in continuous combat, it was especially difficult. Some suffered nightmares for the rest of their lives. Some turned to alcohol. Some simply withdrew, unable to speak about what they'd seen and done. Others eventually found peace. They raised families. They built careers. They lived long, full lives. But all of them, every single one, carried December 19, 1944 in their memory. That day in a frozen barn in the Netherlands, that ballot, those names drawn from a hat. For some, it was the day they were saved, the day their luck held one more time. For others, the day they didn't get lucky, the day they had to watch others go home while they stayed. Both groups understood the same truth. In war, survival is a lottery. Skill and courage matter, but in the end, sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. The King's Shropshire Light Infantry was eventually merged with other regiments as the British Army reorganized after the war. The KSLI as a separate unit no longer exists, but their legacy endures. In memorials across Britain, in regimental museums, in the stories passed down through families. And in that moment on December 19, 1944, a small, largely forgotten moment in the vast machinery of World War II, when a group of exhausted soldiers stood in a frozen barn and waited to hear if they were going home. It wasn't the D-Day landings. It wasn't a great battle. It wasn't a turning point in the war. But for those men, it was everything. It was hope. It was luck. It was the difference between going on and breaking down. It was a reminder in the middle of industrial-scale slaughter that they were still human, that somewhere beyond the war, home still existed, that the nightmare wouldn't last forever. Some of them got to go home that day. The rest kept fighting. All of them earned our remembrance. War is often remembered in grand narratives, the great battles, the famous generals, the turning points that changed history. But war is actually lived in small moments. A letter from home, a hot meal after days of cold rations, a dry place to sleep, a cigarette shared between friends, and sometimes a name drawn from a hat. The men of the 2nd Battalion King's Shropshire Light Infantry fought with extraordinary courage and endurance. From Sword Beach on D-Day to the heart of Germany, they did their duty without complaint, without glory, often without recognition. They were ordinary men called to do extraordinary things, and they did them. On December 19, 1944, some of them got to go home. Others didn't. But all of them, every single one, deserves to be remembered. Not as statistics, not as historical footnotes, but as individuals, as human beings who suffered and endured and survived, or didn't. This is their story. A small story in a big war. But every story matters. Because every soldier matters. Every name in that ballot mattered. And 80 years later, on a peaceful December day in what was once a battlefield, we remember. We remember the long road from Sword Beach. We remember the frozen barn in the Netherlands. We remember the lottery of hope and luck. And we remember the men who served. Lest we forget.